อนรับคุณผู้ชมทุกท่านนะคะเข้าสู่ช่วงของอาเซียนอัปเดตค่ะคุณผู้ชมคะในช่วงที่ผ่านมาค่ะแอนได้มีโอกาสไปสัมภาษณ์พิเศษคุณเจมส์ Sullivan ซึ่งเขาค่ะเป็น Investment Director และเป็น Co-founder ของ Coram Fund นอกจากนี้นะคะเขายังเป็นคอลัมนิสต์ประจำของนิตยสาร Financial Times ด้วยคุณเจมส์ค่ะได้มาฉายภาพให้เราเห็นนะคะกับสถานการณ์ของธนาคารกลางประเทศสำคัญต่างๆเฟดนะคะจะมีมุมมองต่อการขึ้นอัตราดอกเบี้ยครั้งต่อไปอย่างไรบ้างจะเกิดขึ้นเดือนไหนของปีนี้รวมไปถึงค่ะ ECB และ BOJ จะเป็นอย่างไรเดี๋ยวเราไปตามบทสัมภาษณ์นี้พร้อมๆกันได้เลยค่ะ
I think the Fed situation is fascinating, and I think there's a lot of pressure at the moment on the Fed to raise rates because there is some domestic success stories developing in the US. They're starting to see modest inflation come through. They're starting to see modest wage growth come through. The banks within the US are now lending money again, which is something that they haven't done for a number of years. They're paying dividends. So domestically, I think within the US there is justification for the Fed to start putting rates up, albeit it's going to happen very, very slowly, very modestly, and very progressively. It's not going to be aggressive. And I think it's very important that the Fed manage that tightening of monetary policy very, very sensitively, because the consequences for the world economy with the dollar move is not insignificant. So they have to be very careful how they treat Fed policy in the next 18 months. We expect one more rate rise before the end of this year. So we would expect it to be at the very latest in December. And then I think what they will do with that rate rise is it will test the water as to whether the market and the economy is ready for another rate rise. And if the market doesn't destabilize, we would expect to see a second rate rise potentially in the first quarter, if not the second quarter of next year. I think the biggest variable for the US will be what goes on in China, because when the Fed didn't raise rates in January or February this year, they didn't do so because they blamed implicitly in international development, and a lot of people assume that they were referring to the Chinese monetary policy. So I think as long as the Chinese don't do anything overly aggressive with their currency, and that Asian deflation isn't an issue, because Asian deflation being imported into the US has been an issue, I think as long as that remains stable or consistent, then the Fed will, I think, have to embark on a tighter monetary policy. So, as I say, the futures market forecasts that there's a 60% chance of a rate rise before the end of 2016. So, if we're considering that we're coming off an extremely low base and we're still very hesitant about putting rates up, it's all being treated very, very sensitively and all very, very carefully. The only issue for the Fed would be that if inflation came through aggressively, the Fed would then need to respond very aggressively with a much more proactive monetary policy and be much more aggressive with their Fed rate rising. But that's not our forecast. We don't expect inflation to be an issue in the US for some time. I think they have to, and that's what they have done historically. It's only in the last couple of years they've started blaming international factors. But up until then, it was always a domestic issue as to whether they put rates up or put rates down. So to suddenly blame international development is almost a cop-out, as we would say. It's an excuse for not acting. I think they need to move back to a model where they base their monetary policy on their domestic consumption and their domestic growth. So we look at the Bank of England and the ECB, they're still talking about putting rates down, they're still talking about debasing their currency, printing more money, because the pan-European markets are still entrenched in deflation and low growth. So they need to remain supportive by printing more money. So the difference between what the Fed is doing, i.e. looking to put rates up, and the Bank of England that's looking to even put rates down from 25 basis points.
It's kind of contradicting.
Absolutely, they couldn't be different. And then of course we haven't even spoken about the Bank of Japan, which has got its own problems, because the Bank of Japan for the last 3 or 4 years has been trying to debase the strength of the yen to make Japan more competitive. That worked initially, but then the last 18 months the yen has been very strong, and it's given back a lot of that weakness. Because the market started showing signs of nervousness, investors use the yen as a reserve currency, as a safe haven, as a reserve currency, like they do with the dollar. It doesn't always make sense when one looks at the situation in Japan with the debt burden, the demographic, but that is just the way the world works within the investment universe. The yen is observed as a reserve currency. So despite the fact that the BOJ have been printing lots of money, the market has actually been buying more and more yen, strengthening the yen. So there have in effect been more buyers than sellers of yen over the last 12 months. But we believe that Kuroda, the president of the Bank of Japan, the governor, he will not stand for that, and he will indeed initiate another round of QE or another round of Abenomics, as it's been coined, and look to further weaken the yen. It could do. If the market forces dictate, the yen could strengthen, but we're currently about 100 on yen-dollar exchange rate, which is always deemed to be relatively expensive. So we've almost reached a threshold again, and we expect actually the yen to deteriorate from here, so the yen to weaken against the dollar from here. It would be extremely uncomfortable for the Japanese economy if the yen continued to strengthen. It's going to be an observation of theirs, because if they raise rates and other banks are either staying where they are or even lowering rates, what the US do not want is an overly strong dollar. Because what we've seen in recent years is that the strong dollar that we have seen in the last 2 years has significantly and directly impacted the success of the US stock market. So we measure that really by looking at the earnings that are being driven from the US corporate market and the profit margins that are coming through. And they're flat at best, and in some quarters they're significantly declining. And arguably they're only flat at best because the companies are buying back their own stock. So they're executing buybacks, they're using debt to buy back their own stock, and that artificially supports earnings. So the strength of the dollar, we believe, is directly impacting the success of the US stock market. So the US will not want an overly strong dollar, that's for sure, because it makes exports far less attractive. And then the Asian region starts benefiting, or the European bloc starts benefiting, because it's stealing market share from the US market.
ซึ่งคุณเจมส์ ซิลเลเวนนะคะผู้จัดการกองทุนต่างประเทศจาก Coram Fund ค่ะมีมุมมองค่ะว่าณขณะนี้นะคะปัจจัยที่เกิดขึ้นภายในสหรัฐอเมริกาถือว่าเอื้ออำนวยนะคะต่อการที่เฟดนั้นจะขึ้นดอกเบี้ยในอนาคตอันใกล้นี้ต้องติดตามกันต่อไปนะคะว่าน่าจะเกิดขึ้นภายในสิ้นปีนี้แน่นอนแต่ก็ต้องมาดูกันนะคะกับสถานการณ์ที่เกิดขึ้นต่างประเทศทั้งเรื่องราวของจีนเองรวมไปถึงการฟื้นตัวของเศรษฐกิจโลกอย่างไรก็ตามค่ะในฐานะที่คุณเจมส์นะคะก็เป็นคนอังกฤษเขาจะมีมุมมองต่อสถานการณ์ Brexit สหราชอาณาจักรออกจาก EU เป็นอย่างไรบ้างเดี๋ยวเราอดใจรอสักครู่นะคะครั้งหน้ามาติดตามกันต่อค่ะ